Your objective for this video is to examine the transportation revolution and specifically some strengths and weaknesses of four major new technologies, those being roads, canals, steamships, and railroads. Make sure and take good notes. See me if you have any questions. So without a doubt, the most important technological advance in transportation systems was the steam engine. Here's an animated GIF on how a steam engine works. It's pretty basic. Water is boiled, steam goes in here, turbine, piston, wheel, and out this way. And basically what you have now is a wheel that can be powered by steam. Before this, wheels had been powered by muscle, either human muscle or animal muscle, or possibly by water. But now we have an engine that can be powered by steam, which is just water that's boiled. And from this invention, all kinds of new forms of transportation are going to be invented. But before the new inventions come about, there has to be roads. Okay, before roads had been laid down, especially towards the west, because roads had already been paved pretty much in the cities of the east, this is the path that you would take to get somewhere. Not much of a road. But eventually, technology is invented where they can put down large rocks and then smaller pebbles and then eventually sand, then eventually flatten it out to create a road. Something we take for granted. But there were centuries where there was nothing even close to approaching a road. And of course there are some strengths and some weaknesses of roads. Strengths being greater accessibility to average citizens. Roads helped bind the country together by linking cities. And this was very, very important. People could now travel between cities instead of having to go through the forest or go over the plains. There were roads. And of course, roads had a huge economic impact due to the transfer of goods. Some weaknesses: they were often slow and unsafe. Very difficult to construct over difficult terrain. How are you going to build a road, say, over a mountain? Especially without the modern technology that we have today. They're difficult to maintain. They're affected by bad weather. And the next form of transportation that we're going to take a look at are canals. And as you can see, this is kind of a nice drawing of a canal connecting two bodies of water. There would have been water over here, as you can see. Okay, the most famous canal of this time period was called the Erie Canal. Let's take a look at some maps to figure out what that means. Here's a photograph of the Erie Canal. Obviously this is in modern times. Okay, here is a really good map that I think shows the importance of the Erie Canal. This is the Atlantic Ocean. And down over here through Lake Ontario and Lake Erie is the Mississippi River. Before, there was no way to get a ship from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. And through pure human ingenuity, man builds a canal all through here, and now a ship can link up with the Mississippi River, which you can see in this map. Erie Canal through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi River. And this is going to be huge when it comes to trade. Goods are going to come in on ships from Europe and from eastern ports. And now, instead of having to travel across all this land, they'll be able to travel by ship. And this is going to have, again, a huge economic impact. People are going to be buying and selling things all along the Mississippi River and even down through the Gulf of Mexico because of the Erie Canal. And the canals had some strengths and some weaknesses as well. Cities and towns spread westward along the path of canals, and this is, of course, because of trade. and also because of the easy access that canals provide. The Erie Canal, which was considered the eighth wonder of the world, allowed 19,000 boats and 40,000 settlers access to the West. But there were some weaknesses. The water would freeze in the winter. Still water bred mosquitoes and disease. So wherever you had just standing still water, water that wasn't moving, frequently you would have mosquitoes and other kinds of bugs, and if they bit you, you could get very sick and possibly die. The surrounding areas around canals could flood. Next came the steamboat, which used the steam engine. Okay, this is kind of a neat map of some of the waterways, the major lakes and rivers in the United States, and you can see there's a lot of ways you could travel by water. And sailboats really aren't practical because sailboats need the wind or the current. Steamboats don't need that. Some of the strengths of steamboats: it gave new access to markets that had been previously unexplored, which increased industry, which is factories. Robert Fulton was a famous inventor. He invented a steamship called the Clermont, which was the first to be able to travel upstream and against the wind. Very, very important in the transportation revolution. Also, this contributed to the growth of harbor towns like Pittsburgh, New York City. We know Baltimore is a harbor town, and St. Louis. There were some weaknesses. The engines could overheat and possibly even explode. And of course, steamboats were made of wood, which means they could catch fire. And this could lead to disasters and death from colliding with ice or sinking or fire. And they didn't last very long, only about 3 to 6 years before they had to be replaced. And of course, the final and maybe most important new technology of the transportation revolution was railroads. This is a really amazing map of all the railroads in the country. This is probably 20th century, but you can see the spider web of railroads. Okay, once the railroad steam engine was invented, it just expands like crazy. Railroads out to the west. This is a photograph of one of the very first trains, one of the very first railroads ever in the United States. Some of the strengths of railroads: they allowed factory owners to ship goods cheaply and quickly. Railroads were more effective than steamships because they were more accessible to average citizens. Obviously, a steamship had to be near water, but a railroad could go almost anywhere, so average citizens had access to them. Railroads could carry heavy cargo. They made movement easier, faster, cheaper, safer, and more comfortable than other forms of transportation. And railroads could operate in all seasons, carrying people where navigable waterways did not exist. So this again means that you didn't need water to take a train somewhere, whereas you did with steamships. Some of the weaknesses: the technology was far from perfected, and sometimes they would explode or catch fire. Sparks would sometimes burn clothing. Poor brakes and poor quality rails led to accidents. And people were afraid of change and were scared to ride the trains. And lastly, the spread of the railroads contributed to severe modification of the natural environment and overuse of natural resources. So this is just a brief overview of the transportation revolution. Now we're going to take a look at some frequently asked questions about the transportation revolution and about some new inventions. Okay. Settling the West, frequently asked questions. Canals clearly changed transportation in the United States. What was the biggest impact canals had on the United States during the 1800s? Well, cities and towns spread westward along the path of canals, and this greatly increased population centers across the country. Railroads spread at an incredible rate in the 1800s. Why did this happen? Railroads allowed factory owners to ship goods cheaply and quickly. This led to an expansion and growth of the economy. people made more money and could therefore spend more money. What form of transportation had the greatest advantages? Railroads or steamboats? Well, of course, railroads, because the average citizen had greater access to them. You had to live near water to utilize a steamboat, whereas railroads could be placed just about anywhere. Now, here's an interesting map that we'll be referring to the answer to this question. The map below relates to a revolution in transportation technologies. How did this revolution lead to greater settlement of the West? The government, U.S. government of course, who owned all this land, provided land grants, in other words, free land to entrepreneurs who are business owners, to build railroads for sending coal and lumber to the South and West. In other words, the government said to business owners, if you send coal and lumber out west, people will settle there. If you do this, we'll let you have that land for free. This encouraged people to settle and expand the country. Why was the telegraph such an important invention of the 1800s? It allowed people to send news quickly from coast to coast. Before the telegraph, if someone wanted to get a message to someone else, they had to take it to them. That's crazy. We can't even imagine that today in the 21st century. Of all the technologies that impacted the transportation revolution, what was the most important? Without a doubt, that would be the steam engine. People were no longer limited to using muscle, animals, or their own to move things. How did the government protect people's inventions from being stolen and used to make money? Well, the government had inventors apply for patents. This was basically a drawing and description of the invention. Once approved, the invention became the property of the person acquiring the patent. And people still apply for patents and also copyrights, which is for something written or recorded. There were many more textile, also known as cloth, textile is another word for cloth, mills or factories in the North than in the South during the 1800s. Why was this? First, the North had many more rivers, which would provide power to the factories and allow for greater distribution of goods. And second, the North was much more focused on industry than the agricultural South. And finally, were there any negative consequences of the railroads spreading so much into the West? We can remember the map that we looked at and see that the railroads spread all through the West and North and South. Well, in order to build railroads, the natural environment had to be greatly modified or changed. In addition, many natural resources had to be used, which became a drain on the ecosystem. Also, Native American tribes were moved off their land and many animals were killed. So these are some frequently asked questions about the West. We learned a lot in this video. This was kind of a long one. Hopefully you've taken good notes. And as usual, if you have any questions about any of this material, you may ask me in class, before or after school, or just shoot me an email and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. Have a nice day.